All right. Well, good evening, everyone. Welcome to our Jumpstart Wilmington August Kickstart Session. I hope everyone is doing great tonight. Can you go to the next slide, Chris? That would be great. I'm Tamara Rayford, the Executive Assistant of Community Development at Cinnaire, and we appreciate you joining us for this evening. As a friendly reminder, please make sure to mute your phone or listening device unless speaking. Next slide. The purpose of Jumpstart Wilmington is to promote the growth of local developer capacity through training and development to support neighborhood revitalization and community development solutions by providing aspiring developers with the skills, knowledge, and support they need to rehabilitate properties. Jumpstart Wilmington was launched by Cinnaire to increase local developer capacity in Wilmington and stimulate neighborhood revitalization in Wilmington communities. The program consists of three main components, which are 12 to 15 hours of development training, mentoring, and networking. Those interested in participating in the program can visit our website at www.jumpstartwilmington.org to learn more about how to apply. A complementary component of Jumpstart Wilmington is our Kickstart Sessions, which focuses on specific development topics and are open to the broader development community. We would like to acknowledge the Biden School of Public Policy and Administration Center for Communities Research and Services, who assist with program administration. And now I'd like to introduce our speaker of the evening, my colleague, Chris Laurent. Chris Laurent is president of Cinnaire's development division, Cinnaire Solutions. Cinnaire Solutions' diverse and vibrant team works mostly in partnerships to support place-based community-driven catalytic developments. Cinnaire Solutions is currently managing a pipeline of $240 million. Chris serves as director for the Wisconsin Coalition Against Homelessness, director and loan committee member for Forward Community Investments, and director and treasurer of the Madison Reading Project. Chris also serves as a course leader for Marquette University's Associates in Commercial Real Estate program. In 2019, he was appointed as Commissioner and Treasurer for the Dane County Housing Authority. Now, before I turn it over to Chris, I'd like to make a few notes. Chris will take questions throughout the presentation, so please enter your questions in the chat, and our chat monitor, Ali Foster, will present your question to Chris, or feel free to unmute yourself and ask your question. And without further ado, I'll turn it over to Chris.
All right, thanks. I was driving, so no no diss on my colleagues. Well, so thanks for having me tonight. We were chatting about what to talk about, and I understand I've been involved with, and my colleague Aziz Weeks is sort of formally and informally mentoring Jumpstart alum. And so I know that a lot of the focus of the program and a lot of the work that folks contemplating the program are thinking about getting into is really single family housing development. But the process is the same. So I thought it would be interesting to maybe talk about the overall process generally, and then dialing into a little bit of detail about what makes a good team work, because the most operable commodity that successful development has is really trust. And, you know, we focus a lot as a team on building trust, understanding where folks are coming from. This is like in that category of more information than you care to know, but I've done away with New Year's resolutions. And every year I get a tattoo that has my mantra word for the year. And this year's word, actually 2 years ago, was grace. This year's gratitude. So I thought about grace and what grace means. And I think it really focuses on meeting people where they're at. And I think in our world right now, a lot of the discord that we have is people making assumptions about where other people are coming from and not working hard to reach people. So that's something that we're constantly challenging ourselves, and you'll see some of that theme throughout this. It's important to have a good mentor, and I'm grateful and was blessed with having a couple good mentors throughout my career. This is one of those. He and I actually are in partnership right now. I talked to him about 2 hours ago on a development that we worked on just west of Madison. I'm in Wisconsin right now. His name is Roger Bowden, and I was cooking brats for an event here, and Roger stopped by, and I don't have a lot of pictures of him, but this one kind of exemplifies Roger. A few years older than I am, but when I started in the industry, one of the things that he said was that the developer's responsibility is to coordinate the efforts of more talented people and professionals to make something happen. She brings no magic to the table. And I think that's important to think about. What's your role as a developer leader in this process? You will be working with people who are far more skilled than you could ever hope to be. And your role really is just to make sure that you're the glue, that it all works together, that everyone's working to his or her best ability. And that stuck with me. The other mentor that gets along the lines of Grace is Gary Gorman. I worked, and my colleague Nicole Solheim worked for a company out of actually the town I live in, Oregon, Wisconsin, just south of Madison. And well, the guy I reported to was off talking to the mayor or the commissioner of city development. Gary was always in a corner at our events trying to figure out people's stories, the most important people in his mind. And we try to remember this too, are the people that we're serving. So if you're building a single family house, fundamentally, you got to put yourself in the mindset of the person buying your house or the family buying your house. What is their experience going to be? So Gary was always off in a corner asking somebody, tell me about your life. Tell me about your experience living here. And this particular development was in Milwaukee before our company came on board and worked with the residents to transform it. There'd been active prostitution, drug trafficking. It was right next door, a lot of gunshots right next door to a Montessori school. And the residents, through the course of rehab, dealt with the people working around them and contractors buzzing saws at 7 a.m., but sat through it and saw a fundamentally different life than they'd had previous to that. So as Tamira said, I've been involved in the ACRE program. That is a program that was started in 2005 to get Black, Brown, people of color involved in real estate development. The industry is, no secret, mostly white, about 82% white male. And so with a lot of intention, Marquette University, working in combination with two other schools in the city of Milwaukee, led by LISC Milwaukee, Local Initiative Support Corporation, has a hands-on approach to developing real estate. So I was the core instructor in 2007 to 2019, sorry, or maybe 17, sorry. So you can see me in the center. The person to my immediate right, left in the photo, is one of my colleagues right now. She works on our team, Fatima Laster. And then right behind her, the tall guy with the big smile is Montavious Jones, and he's also my colleague. They're working on our team. Most of these folks actually work in city for several of them work for the city of Milwaukee and city development. But I think virtually all have some touch with real estate development. The person on the other side of me wearing pink, she and her husband are from Detroit, and they moved to Milwaukee, but actively, I think he's a doctor, so they're actively involved in real estate investment. So it's a good way to, I think, have an impact on community. But one of the reasons I showed you that picture is this year's text. Well, in the past, they'd used more of an academic text. This is a resource you may want to pay attention to. It's written by a guy named Ben Stevens, and it's called The Birth of a Building. And the structure of the book talks about the real estate development process in a very approachable way. And so we've organized as a team the work that we do in a way that reflects the book. So if you get stuck and you want to learn more about where are we in the process right now, this is a good resource. So I think, Deanna, you've read the book, or at least have the book. So good resource for you to pick up. Again, very easy to understand, accessible read. We've met with Ben Stevens and talked about potential ways to work together to sort of further that understanding and demystify the process. So Ben roughly talks about 8 steps in the development process: forecasting, land, design, approvals, entity formation, financing, construction, and then finally opening. I'll get to each of these in a little bit more detail, so don't feel like I went too fast. This is our team. We are 11 persons strong, scattered geographically throughout the upper Midwest and mid-Atlantic states. Aziz Weeks, some of you may know from the greater Wilmington area, is at like the 2 o'clock position just outside the center. We coming on board to our team, another resource. This is not real estate dependent. Have read the 4 agreements. It was recommended to me by another colleague who also was a friend before joining us, Dancia Stronghill. She's our director of fund development. So she goes to works sort of heads a lot of the grant efforts that we have and tries to attract capital for the work that we do. But what the 4 agreements says is very sort of good beach read. Be impeccable with your word. Don't take anything personally. Don't make assumptions, and always do your best. And the book gets into a little bit more detail on all of those, but those are rules. Again, everything I think here relates to trust. And so when we are working with partners who haven't had experience in real estate development, it's really important that we keep these sorts of things in mind. Say things that honor our word, make sure we're good on commitments. There can be a high level of frustration at times. This is not an easy business. It's a world where folks are constantly telling you no, and you have to have tenacity and persistence to get through. So it's important that we don't take those things personally, and we recognize the positions that people are in, and they may say or do things that reflect that. We make no assumptions. I'll talk a bit more about that. It's easy to sort of be fooled by maybe the immediate situation that you're in a place that you're not. So really pushing and asking those extra questions. Is this what you're trying to tell me right now? Because this is what I heard you say. Is that right? Constantly checking yourself to make sure that you're where your other folks, your other partners are. And again, always do your best. This is not this work, particularly for those of you who are looking at doing real estate development, investing in real estate. It's going to require time and effort outside of 9 to 5. So make sure that you're always putting your best foot forward. You can be, especially if you're cramped for time, you may feel like you have to rush information that you're sharing with people, but making sure that whatever work product that you have at that particular time, whether it's your personal financial statement or architectural plans, make sure that it looks crisp, and fundamentally make sure that you're trying to understand who your audience is so that they understand specifically what you're trying to say and you're enhancing good communication. One of the things Dr. Mark Epley, who crafted the ACRE program, had started out with and repeatedly comes back to is whether what you're proposing is a use in search of a site or a site in search of a use. You may have a great site and think it's a great location. I always kind of gravitate towards Starbucks. And so it's important, if it's a Starbucks, that you're matching. If you have that would be a good use in search of a site. I have this potential user. Does the touch points of that particular site really match what the end user is looking for? Or are you trying to force it? You could be off a major thoroughfare, think you have a Starbucks and you're going to attract people off there. It's not going to happen. That secondary site may be better used for multifamily or maybe several single family housing developments. So that's important to always check your check step as a first step. What am I really trying to do? Am I trying to find a use for this particular area, or does the area present itself as a good use for something else? This is important, and this is something that we find, again, we have an active, robust pipeline, a lot of states we're working in right now, a lot of geographies. Folks new to the industry always fall in love with their projects. So recognize this is painful, but nobody will ever love your deal as much as you do. So it's great to have that passion, but don't be surprised if people aren't sharing that passion for your idea. The corollary to this is never fall in love with a building. I've done a lot of active adaptive reuse where we're taking a school or a hospital or a warehouse and converting it to a different site. It can be really tempting to try to want to preserve that building, and you'll do absolutely everything you can to save it. At some point, you just have to know when and be able to be flexible and morph. It is the rule and not the exception to the rule that your plans never work out the way that you think they do. So you've got to be able to flex and move, make decisions on your feet. Again, drawing on the information from the folks around you and make the best decisions collaboratively that you can. So the first step is really forecasting. When you have an opportunity to do something, let's say that you have a lot that comes available, we try to forecast what could this be. So does anybody want to say what that thought process might look like? There's a site that comes available. It's maybe 2 lots or about half an acre on close to a big intersection. How would you begin to determine what that site could be? And if I don't hear anybody, I'm going to start calling on random names because nobody's on video. Marcus?
Well, Christopher. Oh,
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
Oh, Tanya, go ahead.
Okay, so I know it's the conceptual phase. So you got to look at the cost of the land, right? Survey, I guess, obtain some surveys to make sure you understand the parameters, what you can and what you can't do, and how much it's going to cost to build.
Yeah, well, but even before that, so it's good to have that kind of working knowledge, and those were great ideas. So Marcus said, first look to see if the city has comprehensive plans for that area. Look up the right uses. What's another, these are great ideas. What's another word for, how would you describe all that sort of initial work? Huh? You're gathering data, aren't you? Due diligence is good. But yeah, first step is really what information do we have at our fingertips right now? And what could that thing be? So land use plans, most municipalities, I know in Wisconsin, I think in most other states, are required to have a comprehensive land use plan that talks about if something happens at this location right now, these are the types of uses that we should pursue. So a lot of municipalities right now, we used to zone our land so that industrial work would take place all in one place, and we'd have our commercial district in another place, and we'd have residential uses maybe a ways away, certainly from the industrial use. Those areas in a lot of municipalities, as people begin to rethink how and where they want to live, those lines aren't as distinct. So we're blurring a lot of those lines, but really understanding that on the front end can help you figure out what that thing can be. So you'll see concept is really coming up with that idea. A pro forma, does anyone know what a pro forma is or want to take a stab at an answer? I had no idea what this was. I had no idea what a pro forma was when I started in this industry 30 years ago. So
Cash flow projections.
Cash flow projections, right. Anyone else want to add to that? It's distilling down all those little bits of data into one kind of concise document. And part of that is a cash flow projection. So typically on a pro forma, you would have your total costs, which we call total uses of funds. What's it going to cost for land acquisition, for building acquisition, if any, the rehab that's necessary, and then that gives you your total uses, and then you have your total sources. So in some areas, the sources might be less than your uses, which we call a gap. But in any case, with a gap, sources and uses always have to balance. And if there's one thing that just drives me crazy, when I was a professor, and I should say professor, layman, or lay professor, and or sort of, co-colleague, is when sources and uses don't balance, because then you're not quite where you think you are. So those are important characteristics. And then over time, really making sure that you have cash flow projections. How is this development going to work day one? How's it going to work through construction? Am I going to have enough capital to be able to build what I think I want to build, or rehab what I think I'm going to rehab? And then once I'm stabilized, am I going to make money, or am I going to have to feed it or put money into it ongoing? So it's really, it's a forecast going out of how the development's going to look. And those are the basic terms right there. And every pro forma should have those common elements. And then from there, you're really building various levels of sophistication. You can have depreciation, which is important for tax purposes. You can have more complicated side analysis if you're looking at outside tools that calculate new markets credits, housing credits, grant funds that might be eligible. And so all this data is collected in one place. And this is something that lives with the development forever. I mean, good development. So I alluded to the development that I did with Roger. We built an apartment building together 6 years ago now in Middleton. We refinanced in December, and we had to make a small cash contribution to fund something called a COVID reserve to address the pandemic, because Fannie Mae, the lender, was nervous. We just got our funds back. We released it through we made distributions. It came out of the development, which replaced the cash that we had to come in. So all that's still tracked in my pro forma. So the same pro forma that I started with 6 years ago, we're still using and making modifications to that, but that's how we're tracking who's getting what out of the development. So an important tool, good place for meeting notes. So we have, I'll show you a slide. We have an organization tool that we use to track all this stuff, but these are the basic sort of building blocks of that first category, forecasting. Here's my other sort of take home, which is honor the numbers. The numbers do not lie. Another corollary to that is don't be delusional about the numbers that you put in there. So one of the things that people talk about is a market analysis or a market study. So if you are building single family houses, so you're building a new construction single family house on the 2 lots I described earlier on in your neighborhood, where would you get good data to know how much that it costs, first of all, for those developments? Who would you talk to early on? Colette, you're on video, so I'm going to call on you.
Realtor.
Talk to a realtor, maybe.
Yes.
They may have good data. The realtor would probably be good on the sales side of things to know how much properties are actually selling for. I'll come back to you and ask you more questions about that. But on the construction side of things, to know, you may talk to a realtor on the front end and say, how big of a house should I build? And if the realtor says 1,400 square feet, then where else could you get data to know how much buildings would cost? Akeem says lender. A lender might have good information they're willing to share with you, particularly if you have good relationships with them. Allie, you're already off mute. Contractors, if you have relationships with general contractors or other builders, they may be able to help you know how much buildings cost. Architects, I know I saw someone from Breckstone on, I think. So don't take my comment personally. Use one of the 4 agreements. Sometimes architects aren't very proficient in costs. So they may be really good on the hard cost side of things. Hard costs are bricks and sticks, things that you'll have a subcontract for, things ultimately that are depreciable for tax purposes. They may not have working knowledge of soft costs like attorney fees, one of the sort of hard and soft costs are architectural fees. So hopefully they'd have a good handle on that. If you're engaging an architect, what they'd what they charge you for those. Wally says other local small developers, absolutely. Deanna had asked me, and I may come back and talk during the Jumpstart about, I like to be very specific with my numbers. And there are industry accepted cost categories for larger projects, either CSI or Master Spec. They're two organizations that sort of ebb and flow in terms of who's got prominence in the industry. But concrete is always Division 3. And there are subcategories for all of those. We try to track, even for small single-family housing developments, and I will tell you that small developments don't often adhere to those same specifications I just referred to. We try to, just so we've got a good database of what things should cost. So some work is done by the piece. So drywallers may come in and they get paid by the sheets of drywall that they're installing and not necessarily on a per square foot basis. And other work is done more on a square foot basis. Some work is done on a per unit basis. So cabinets, for example, square foot isn't a good way to look at information, but per unit is, because you only have one kitchen and one, maybe two baths. So so those are some things that you can look at just to be really disciplined with the numbers. So we talked about a pro forma. Don't worry about catching this. Just know there are lots of numbers here. This is a pro forma that a colleague of mine and I created 15 years ago that I still try to use as a rough sort of, do I have a potential development deal? There's a side sheet that we use to this that looks at some of the cash flow information, but this gives you some sense of the complexity that we look at. My objective in crafting this was, again, understanding who my audience is as a developer, knowing that I have to talk to lenders, investors, municipalities, sometimes the mayor, sometimes the local development person. Having a tool, even if they're not numbers people, and there are a lot of people in this industry who aren't numbers people, having a tool with which I can communicate and they can go, yeah, I kind of get the gist of what's going on. And then also communicating a level, without saying it, of transparency and trust. Again, that T word comes up. How do we build trust with the people that we're working with so that we can get to a point of commonality and we can each get what we need out of the development. So this is still really that first part about forecasting. So we have an idea, we assess the landscape, we may have some sort of visceral ideas. I want to build a 3 or 4 story house here. I've decided I want to do that because it's within walking distance of a new elementary school that's being proposed. There are a number of employment opportunities downtown, so mom and dad can, potentially walk to work. There's a park next door. I think this would be a great spot for a single family house. We do a rough pro forma. One of the slides I meant to do and I didn't is we sort of have this, you guys probably see it because you're kind of in Hurricane Alley, the cone of uncertainty. When a hurricane comes in, you kind of know early on exactly where it's going to be, and that cone widens out because you don't know which path the hurricane's going to take. Development's the opposite of that process. There's so much uncertainty at the front end of a development because you may have an idea, but things could take a couple, all kinds of different directions. And you get to more certainty and specificity when you get to the top of that cone or the top of the pyramid. So that's really the development process. And the other way I like to think about it is, if you watch the construction process and anybody's done a basement remodel or watched a house go up, everything is really rough. In fact, the first part of what you do is called rough framing. It's not precise. You're pretty close, but you could be off by 1/4 inch, 1/2 inch. The next level that goes on after you do mechanicals, rough mechanicals, is insulation. and then drywall goes on. And drywall covers up all the mistakes in the framing. You may have shims that go behind the drywall to make sure that you've got a smooth surface. The next level that goes on, you tape and finish. All the irregularities that you had in the drywall get smoothed out. But there's still a crack in the bottom, and that gets covered up with trim. So by the time you see the finished product, everything looks really tight. You're thinking, man, they really built this with a lot of precision. They didn't. It's a matter of constantly sort of covering for the last step in the process. So that's very similar to the development process. So we have the rough pro forma. We determine, is it feasible? Go, no go. And then really charting a course. Do we have a plan that gets me from today to when the development gets built and ultimately, is able to start producing revenue, whether it's a commercial development and I have a commercial tenant, whether I sell it for sale, or whether it's rental property and I'm able to get rental income. From our perspective, we do something, we only work in partnership right now with few exceptions. So we craft something called an MOU, a memorandum of understanding, where we get to a level of agreement with our partners that says, we're going to do this, be responsible for this. This is the actions we're going to take. These are our fiscal, financial responsibilities. We may have to guarantee developments with somebody else or for somebody else, for a lender. And then our partners, this is what they're doing. So we craft that point of agreement. We sometimes have to revisit those because what people think they're going to do, we could lose a staff member, for example, and work that we think we're going to do doesn't have to, but we want to make sure that we're always in alignment with that agreement, which is a little bit short of a partnership agreement, but at least speaks to intent. Then we engage the team. And one of the things that's really important is finding and selecting a good team. So back to the original comment I made that Roger had said about coordinating other people. Maybe we could talk a bit. If you are brand new to the industry, how would you select an architect? Does anyone have ideas on that? Or if you want to put comments in the chat, feel free to do that. Breckstone Architects, how do people approach you? I don't know who's on from Breckstone. Oh, it's Dave.
Hi, Chris.
Dave, yeah. How do new people find you as an architect?
Usually through references, for the most part. When we've worked or had good success with other folks doing the same type of work, people will refer them to us, whether in our case it's the land bank for people trying to buy, houses cheaply, or if they've had success from other developers that, or even the city really can't recommend us, but they will say, we've done a lot of work with the city, and that usually means if they like to work with us, they'll use us more often. So
yeah,
I think that's probably the major ways that people find us.
Yeah, check references, ask around, have lots of conversations. Same thing goes for general contractors. If you see work taking place in the area, general contractors will likely have a job sign up. Call those folks, call people, get references, figure out who's worked with them. One of the things that I will really caution you about, there are lots of different styles, types of people to work with. Trust your gut. If you don't have a good feeling about a particular group, unless you're really investing the effort, it just may not work out. And fundamentally, at the end of the day, because it's your capital or your investors' capital at risk, if it's not working for you, it's not working for the development. So you want to make sure that you can get to that point of, again, understanding, trust, so that you get good results. Because if you're withholding communication in that process, and everyone's really excited at the front end of a deal. because you are doing something that you think nobody's ever done before. Things are going to be awesome. You know, just make sure that you're constantly having those check steps. And just like relationships, when my now wife and I started dating, we started seeing a counselor because we wanted to make sure we didn't have bumps, but we had bumps in previous relationships, and we wanted to make sure that that stuff from the past didn't come up into our current relationship and our current reality. So make sure that you're focused on communication, and if what you're saying doesn't seem to be resonating, or you feel like maybe the other party isn't necessarily engaged, make sure that you stop and address that right away, because it's only going to lead to future problems. And I have made decisions in the past, or strongly been encouraged to make decisions for political reasons. You're working, when I say political, it's more really relationship. We are working on a development in Michigan right now where we're working with an architect from the East Coast whose best friend made $1 million donation to the development that we're working on. And it was this firm's first foray into multifamily. So, we constantly recognized why we made that decision. I mean, good people, good team, but steep learning curve. And when people learn, they make a lot of mistakes, which isn't bad, but you have to be prepared, because at the end of the day, your other partners probably won't cover their mistakes, unless you're sort of real upfront about that. We could work with Breckstone and say, hey, we're going to go into a new area. Good opportunity for an upfront. We recognize you haven't done this work, but we'd like to grow together. We like working with you. Just have that conversation up front. How are you going to learn? How much stuff is on the clock? How much, are you willing to do on your own? But again, your job is to really manage and keep things moving. So this stage, engaging the team, refining the plan, and testing assumptions. You're constantly, when I say test assumptions, you're going back to your pro forma. Architect made a change, may increase or save money. You're constantly reflecting that in your pro forma and your assumptions. So on the front end of a development, you may have a big number for something called contingency. And contingency really is that stuff that you're not planning for. So again, in my cone of uncertainty or cone of certainty, you may have on the front end of a development a 20 or 25% contingency because you just don't know. And then as you get a little bit more comfortable, you may move some of that contingency over to green roofs or some technology that might be sort of fresh and innovative. It's really important to you. But again, you have to be prepared to let that stuff go, or maybe shrink the size of the green roof because other numbers come to fruition and you recognize you're not where you thought you were at the beginning. But that's very circular. And I've seen a lot of people get caught up in this, wheel of uncertainty, and then they can just never get off the dime and move. And part of the art of real estate development is knowing when to say when, and saying, we're ready to take this forward and start talking to municipalities, to zoning professionals, to funders, to get funded and keep things moving. So on that front, what's the risk of going to a lender before things are really cooked? You're saying, I'm going to do a development. Maybe your costs are a little bit off. Your costs are a little bit shy, but you're promising, big windows, new technologies, I don't know, green roofs and lots of amenity spaces, state of the art. What's the risk in doing that too early before you really know your numbers? You risk losing credibility. Yeah. So the point, I think it's okay to have, we've had a couple conversations locally in Wilmington where the city has said, hey, we want something to happen here. And can you, before we go down too many rabbit holes, doing a test step with the mayor's office to say, here's what we're thinking right now. Are we on the same page with our ideas? And if there's agreement on that, then we'll start investing. but we're not sharing a lot of specificity because we don't, there's a risk, particularly with mayors, political types, that if you start representing that you can do something that you can't and you have to dial back, again, be impeccable with your word. It's one of the first agreements. It's very hard to regain that trust or credibility if you can't promise. So we always try to err on the side of under promising and over delivering. And I've done that through most of the developments that I've done. I may have a placeholder, really like to do this right now. I can't make any commitments to this because our capital stack is really unsure right now. And then they're delighted when we're able to do something we thought maybe we could do, but actually made it happen. You could spend over your budget or won't be approved by the powers that be. Yep, same sorts of things. And it's very hard with some programs to spend more than your budget. It's not a question of just raising more capital. It's really, really hard to find the money that's necessary just to make things work, particularly as we're coming out of a pandemic and there's been cost escalation, commodity shortages. So timing's critical. Mayors are always looking to see progress. Yeah. The other sort of mantra we have, my team, you can probably imagine, get sick of me saying this kind of stuff, but don't make perfect the enemy of good. Sometimes, particularly when you're starting out, being really good is enough instead of like knocking one out of the park. Singles and doubles are great, right? They get you on base. They let you sort of have your time at bat another day. So anyway, just keep those things in mind. So this is kind of the corollary to always know where your numbers are and don't be delusional. I heard early in my career the parable, I don't know that it's true or not, of Alaskan bush pilot. So this guy's young, but the story I heard was there was a guy in his mid to late 50s, Alaskan bush pilot, who was sitting at a bar, and somebody said, "How are you still doing that?" And the average age of a bush pilot's like 27. It's incredibly dangerous. It's more dangerous than crabbing. A lot of people die. And the pilot said, because I learned very early in my career how to practice one maneuver, and that's a 180-degree turn. If the conditions didn't look great for landing, I turned around and I went somewhere else. And if you've done your part at this very early stage, notice I spent most of the time so far talking about that first stage, really understanding, is this a good idea or not? And being able to walk away is the best skill that you can do. I've seen too many people early in their career invest their heart and soul and energy into something that just didn't really have a fair opportunity of getting off the ground. The conditions weren't right. There wasn't enough capital. The tricky part is, again, this is an industry where people tell you no a lot. So you've got to try to figure out how to balance, the no's with the possibilities. And great opportunity to develop a good set of mentors who, if nothing else, could just get you real about the assumptions that you're making in the development. Are your operating expenses appropriate? Are your costs good? Is your timing projection reasonable? And those are things that can help you make a good decision. But believe the data. Again, honor the numbers. The numbers don't lie. This is that process that I talked about. We use a program called Smartsheet, which, if you've used Microsoft Project or you're at all familiar with that, sort of blends an Excel format. So it's very intuitive. It's nice to share with our partners. These are our developments. There's an opportunity to upload documents. So we may have a market study. You look under row 18 that's on here. The paperclip right above that means that we can upload that information. So this is the backbone of our entire development process. This goes on for probably 200 to 300 different rows, but every step in the development process is laid out here, and they're all organized according to the 8 steps that I started with. So next step is land, and this gets to some of the things that I think Tanya was talking about. Site control is a purchase and sale agreement. They call it different things. Offer to purchase, just based on what municipality or what part of the country you're in. But it really is a document that says, I will buy. I have a sort of unrevocable document that says, I will buy your property if all these conditions are met. And so it lays out all those things. It lays out a timeline, and maybe earnest money that goes down. But at that point that I have site control, I can go to a municipality and make any necessary changes. I can represent the land to some extent as if it were my own. That's an important step. It can be very awkward. And I've been in a couple situations recently where we applied for a request for proposal and had the architect had drawn the building on land that we didn't control or own. It's a situation you don't often want to get into. You don't want to be planning for something where you haven't at least had some sort of written agreement with the owner that you're thinking about doing something new with them, with the land. Survey looks at boundaries, who owns what. There could be easements, different encumbrances that you're not aware of. A surveyor, a good surveyor, will help you mitigate that risk by telling you specifically what's there that may not readily be available if you just look at the property. Title documents, again, that varies. Title laws are very different, and processes are a bit different in Delaware than other states that we deal with, just in terms of closing and escrow. But the intent there and title insurance takes care of all those risks that the surveyor largely will lay out, but there could be other stuff. There could be mortgages recorded against the property that folks aren't aware of. And so really understanding who's in the chain of title, who could step in front of you as a potential seller, fleshing that out early on are important things to know. Utilities, it could be underground, it could be an easement related to underground services that you can't readily see, knowing where that stuff is all ties into. Environmental risk, big in virtually every city. Every city at some point did something, and so knowing what's there is important. And then fundamentally an appraisal, both maybe knowing what the property's worth when you buy it, and then certainly at the end of the day, what's the property worth as improved once you've made your improvements. Next up is design. If you have an existing building, we do something called the Capital Needs Assessment, or CNA. Again, engage the architect, engineering. We have these as folders in the Smartsheet system that I just laid out, but there could be gobs of information related to that. So engineering really gets at the structural elements of the building. If you have soils that may have been filled at some point in the past, you may need supplemental support underneath ground to be able to support the building that you're producing. Those could be pilings where you're pounding steel into sort of native soils or bedrock, geopiers, systems that float on top of rubble that may not support as much. And then, depending on how high or whether you have big spans that aren't supported with columns, you could have more complicated engineering systems. So really tracking and managing that's important. For single family houses, relatively simple work in the engineering, but you could have walls. I've seen some walls on, I know most of the houses in Wilmington are row houses, but you could have an end unit where just because they're old, structurally, some of the exterior walls can bow out. And so stabilizing those are important to the overall building integrity. Again, be honest with your assumptions. I've seen a lot of buildings over-designed, and it's much better to design a building right the first time than to have to do something called value engineering. So what value engineering is when you have your architectural plans, you refine those, you work with your contractor, and you put those out to bid, and the bids come back too high to the point where you can't beat the subcontractors down in their pricing any more than is reasonable. You have to redesign, and you never get 100% back out of a building that you do had you just bid it right the first time. So that is to say, for example, that you may have an extra bedroom, an extra bathroom. You may have 3 bedroom, 3 bath. You want to take out 1 bathroom. You're never going to get 100% of that value back out of the building. So it's better to just be honest with where those numbers are coming in the first time. And there's a lot of variability. That's one of the complicating parts in the whole program. You could have subcontractors who are really hungry for work, who may bid crazy low right now just because they want to keep their workers employed. And that may not be indicative of the next time they build. So there's some level of predictability in the marketplace, but it's not foolproof. So good way to manage that is just staying close, having active conversations with contractors, understanding if you're working with a general contractor, what are their relationships like with their subcontractors, knowing what motivates them. Those are all key factors, but getting more depth on that through the questions. Approvals, again, I alluded on this. Zoning, just making sure you're consistent with whatever the big picture plan is. So zoning is really going to talk about density in residential setting, or more specific types of use. There's something that's seeing more prominence right now, but remains to be seen how viable it's going to be going forward, called mixed use, where you have a mix of commercial and residential uses together. There's a lot of question, could go either way, about a post-pandemic world. We know in our office space at Cinnaire right now, we need a lot less space because our employees, virtually, I think all of our employees are planning to work at least sometime at home. So our office space needs aren't as intensive as they used to be. And so we may have a presence. I'm planning to be in the office 3 days a week, but then presumably those other 2 days could be used by a colleague. So we could need, roughly half the amount of space that we needed previously. So that could change the overall market, but for more specific markets, you could potentially make the case that if I'm living in a mixed-use development in the residential section, I would love to just go downstairs and work. So the demand for that space may increase. It's probably too early to tell. Permits are the hard cost construction. Every municipality reviews architectural plans to some degree, different levels of complexity based on how big and how complicated the development is. Healthcare systems, healthcare clinics, a lot of scrutiny. Other more residential systems still reviewed, but probably not as intensively. And then whether you're paying property taxes or pilot is a payment in lieu of taxes. Municipalities, some benevolent uses may pay lower taxes, just sort of given the use. Every state municipality has different laws that vary a little bit.
Oh,
Someone saying something? Oh.
sorry.
So entity formation, another important part of the process. If whether you are going alone as a developer, most developers who do this work I'm jumping ahead to organizational documents. They'll create something called a limited liability company or LLC that is intended to be all the tax benefits flow through in an LLC to you as a personal. So you're taxed as an individual. So you're taxed individually, but it gives you some level of protection really against litigation. So somebody sues you, something goes south, they sue that entity first before they get to you personally. There is the concept of a single asset entity among a lot of real estate developments. So every development has its own distinct ownership structure. So you're building, one apartment building, 4-unit one day, you would create an LLC saying 4-unit, 1, comma LLC. The next one you build, you create another single asset entity. So one of the nice things, we talked a bit about MOUs. The MOU is really the sort of forward-thinking map that you use to describe how the process works. And then from there, you're able to draft the organizational documents and then get to partnership agreements. So partnership agreement really is a more intensive version of the MOU that talks more specifically about who does what, talks about roles and responsibility, but fundamentally the partnership document talks about what happens when things go bad. If you are fraudulent, who has responsibility to come in and manage that entity, to take care of the asset? Because your whole structure really is about that asset, protecting that, making sure that that produces revenue to the extent that you thought it would. So these documents all work in concert. It's not unusual to have them refined. You could change participation, so you have new groups that come into that. Having the setup in the right way on the front end is important. And you know, outside of an attorney typically will create those, though it's really easy, particularly in the state of Delaware, to just create your own LLCs. And there are boilerplate sort of organizational documents that talk about why you created, what the nature of the work is. You have to decide things like whether you're member managed or manager member managed. But getting that stuff straight also has tax implications. So good opportunity at the front end to really talk through, you know, pay $500 for an hour of tax professional time to really figure out what's the best choice for you. There are other grants that you may receive that would require a different corporate structure, like an S Corp or C Corp, probably unlikely, but really understanding that and getting a working knowledge of that would be key. Financing, doing inner city work, particularly where the value of what you either are getting from cash flow, or if you're selling developments where you are building stuff and it costs you this much to build something that you can sell for this much, are going to require a lot of complex financing. And so Cinnaire right now, Deanna, Tamira are working on programs, you know, to facilitate this. The city right now with some disaster recoveries, trying to think about how it can, you know, support these efforts. So there are a lot of different tools that are at least in the concept right now of helping reconcile that relationship, but it's just a lot of work. It's a lot of work to fill out the forms that are necessary. And fundamentally, funders want to know who you are, what your track record has done, who's going to reconcile things if they don't go as you expect them, and really what your plan is for going forward. How do we make sure that things don't go off track? So I say it's a lot of work, but it's not necessarily hard work. It's just time. So you want to make sure, again, this gets back to the fourth agreement, always doing your best, making sure that when you're filling these forms out, maybe get another set of eyes on them to make sure that you're not missing information, that the information that you're sharing is clear and legible, that it follows, that you have dividers, you know, that organize things in a way so that whoever that audience is in reading these documents can go through. So I can't tell you, if there's one thing I think that our team does really well, it's presentation. It's organization, presenting and telling the story in a way that resonates with a great audience. And that's been a real key to our success so far. You know, because we're doing work that could be really complicated. And if we can decomplicate it, demystify it, it leads to good results. And again, one of the colleagues, Fatima, you know, who we're working with right now, built an art gallery on the north side of Milwaukee. And the quality of her material, she needed some extra capital because she had contractors kind of flake out on her, and she had, you know, a hole in her capital stack she had to make up. The quality of the materials that she had presented, she's a former banker, were crisp and understandable. It was very easy to get to yes, because she just looked like she had her act together, and she does. So that's, you know, think about that. Who's my audience, and am I really showing them my best foot forward? I'm not going to get into all the details for a lot of what this information is, but again, separate legal tab It's great to keep all correspondence sort of separate particularly when you're talking to attorneys. It's a lot easier now too, just with the search functions that you have in mail groups, but good record keeping is key to this type of work, because you could get a quote from a lender and misplace it, and being able to find that quickly to know what the interest rate was that they're talking about, what terms, what they were looking for, being able to reference that stuff quickly helps you. And again, if you can pull that information quickly, it's going to impress your other capital partners, because they'll know you're on top of things. We talked a lot about construction. One of the things that has been important to me in my career and is important to our team is really having a working knowledge of, well, really all different functions of real estate development. That takes time and practice, but particularly construction. And I have always asked a lot of questions of subcontractors. And, my limitation is that, I don't look like a contractor. So, I always felt like the guys wanted to beat me up when I was on the job site, but I still kind of push through that and ask the questions of the concrete guys and the framers. Why are you doing that? Like, explain to me how this is working. That builds trust and credibility. But it also gives you real working knowledge of how processes work, why they flow in the way that they do. And that's great working knowledge, because, I found you attract a lot more flies with honey than you do with vinegar. So being able to say, help me explain why, because I've seen this kind of function in a couple different ways. Is there a reason you're doing things differently than I've seen before? Is a very different approach than just butting heads with people. And you can lead to great results, because fundamentally, if you are creating a job site and an experience with your contractors where everybody wins, your contractors are profitable, your architect's profitable, your lenders are making money, everybody wins, everybody's going to want to work together again. But if you create a lot of acrimony and conflict and it's unpleasant for everybody, that's not going to be the case. So keep that in mind. But you can see, and Deanna has this, and Tamira, they'll share this with you. But again, these are the ways that we organize all this information. But good way to track the whole development or the whole construction process, which is pretty intensive, but it's a sub process to the overall development process. So the final fun part, and you'll notice, even though it looks like this is a linear process, it's really not. A lot of these things are happening concurrently. So we may, when we get, through approvals, for example, we may start creating marketing materials, because we're so excited about the development that we do. We want to start pre-marketing, sharing the ideas of what we're proposing. And so one of the things I've done very early on with a lot of developments is create a logo, creates a brand and identity. It's important that that not be the end all be all to the work that you're doing, but it helps people wrap their heads around, those special parts. This is really designed, a lot of these categories for rental properties, but you'd have very similar for sale. Create a tab that would talk, your broker probably is going to work with marketing. The work that we're doing, we're closing shortly on 7 single-family lots in Wilmington, and we're attracting buyers, most of whom probably have never owned houses. So we have a pretty intensive program that we're working with right now to give people confidence to work with lenders, to be able to have the resources necessary to buy houses. So we're tracking all those processes concurrently, similarly to the way that we would more rentally focused developments. But this is the fun part. The other big part that it's important to do is just celebrate your successes. So we typically have a ribbon cutting ceremony, groundbreaking ceremony, letting people know. It's a lot of work to get to the closing table. And closings, when you put all that capital together and everybody says, we're ready to go, that's a big accomplishment. Still a big accomplishment to get through construction. But once you're done, it's important to celebrate, because everybody's invested a lot of themselves into the development. So this is not a perfect process. One of our mantras, this is based after a Portland firm, the principal of the firm is a guy named Dan Wyden, who was drinking beer one night with Phil Knight, the founder of Nike, and through that beer on the back of a napkin literally came up with the phrase, just do it. But one of the things Dan challenged his folks to do, and this particular graphic, which isn't very good, is made of push pins. So an intern class this particular year of folks working for this PR advertising firm took one of the Wydenisms, Dan's sayings, fail harder. The new phrase apparently is fail up. So this is an industry where you are going to make a lot of mistakes. And again, if you're so focused on not screwing up, you're not pushing yourself hard enough to get to where you are. Your mistakes should all be recoverable, but learn from them and make sure you don't repeat those again. I have screwed up big time on a lot of different efforts in my career. I remember putting together my first job in real estate development. Someone gave me a shoebox and said, we got a building under construction right now. The general contractor doesn't have a handle on where the contracts are. Figure this out. So I figured it out, but I missed one of the categories. So I thought we were in this great position. I told the partners, hey, we're ahead of schedule, whatever. I missed the category. I think it was concrete. So I'm like, oh my God, like we're actually like underwater. We're going to have to raise more capital. I learned from that mistake. Obviously it's still stuck with me, but I've never made that mistake again. I always double check when you're working on the numbers. And this is more sophisticated or complicated than we have time to address today, but try to figure out where those pulse points are, where you're constantly rechecking your work. And if you have time and luxury, it's nice to run parallel someone with maybe a different approach to numbers and make sure there's some way of being in sync. That's a great way to make sure that you're not getting off track. So that was timed at 68 minutes, which is right where I wanted to end up to be. There's a lot of information that again, the intent tonight was to give you an overall question of the flow. Anybody have thoughts or questions, reflections that come up? Did you think it was funny when I couldn't drink water and I kind of like sprayed some on my face? Did you notice that?
I didn't notice it.
Okay.
Anyone who has any questions or comments for Chris, please feel free to unmute yourself and go ahead and speak up and speak out. So we have some general comments. Well said, well done, Chris. Thank you, very informative, very insightful. Looks like a lot of people appreciated your insight. Quiet bunch today. Took a lot of notes. Thanks, Tanya. Okay.
Chris, can you guys hear me?
Go ahead, Wally.
Yes. Hi, good evening. First off, I want to echo the sentiments that have been written already. Really, really great presentation and just insights from your experience along the years. I appreciate how you sort of provided that context along the way for the information. My question to you is one sort of centers on getting started. And one of the things that I've been thinking through lately is sort of the combination of that due diligence piece where you're putting together your pro forma, you're analyzing your deal, you're maybe falling in love with it a little bit. But the reality comes as a new developer in terms of coming to an idea of how you're going to finance your project, sort of, and getting control of the land itself. So don't want to necessarily put the cart before the horse, not fall in love with something and make errors in judgment. But when you have a situation where you maybe find a potential opportunity for development, but you don't necessarily, what the next steps are, but you don't know how you're going to get there, particularly around financing. How do you avoid setting yourself up for a potentially bad situation because you fell in love with an opportunity, took on commitments that maybe you shouldn't have, or how do you avoid those situations?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think the drumbeat in the industry right now is for Black and brown people, they lack capital, right? I think that's partly true, but I also think that there's a lot of capital that's out there, particularly for people with good ideas. The question is, how do you really flesh out a good idea? So I think, and this is where I give, my colleagues, Tamara and Deanna, props for just awareness, because you really need that starting point to know, first of all, we have to reconcile the relationship between stuff that works. If you were to rely purely on market conditions, nothing would work in inner city areas, because you're not going to generate enough revenue to support, work. And even for market rate developments, the 2 market rate developments that I did required subsidy. We got tax incremental financing, or TIF dollars. So I think step 1 is really coming up with our development. Fundamentally is solving a problem. So what problem is out there that needs to be solved? And the problem could be as simple as there's no dry cleaner in the area, right? You have a lot of growing professionals, the 20 somethings, they like to have their shirts pressed. There's no place to do that. So we need a place where we can have, a dry cleaner, and then maybe it grows out from there to something else. And then, so you craft kind of what that solution is, and then coming up with how much it costs to build. And this is where the art comes in, where it's got to be nice enough to be able to have people say, I want to help that happen. And then knowing the resources that are out there to put together the capital necessary to make that happen. So that's, in like a lot of things, I think the more practiced you become, it's kind of, it's very easy for, particularly, colleagues on my team who've been doing this for a while, and me, to be able to do that. So I think that's it. So the next level of that, I think, from a business strategy from our perspective, is coming up with problems that are so egregious that communities feel compelled to solve. So and I know that sounds kind of lofty, but we try to find those big problems right now where we can really make a difference. If we did this, it's going to be transformational to your community, right? It's going to be that catalytic thing where other developments want to develop around that. So, and it doesn't have to be big. I mean, it could be, and we're working on some developments right now that are like corner liquor stores in Wilmington, where the mayor and his staff are saying, this is a problem right now. This just needs to go away. It's got to be something else. So that could be the problem that you're trying to solve, figure out what that solution is, and then just be real about those numbers. Does that answer your question? Or I feel like I'm close, but maybe I missed part of it.
No, I think you sort of honed in on it, which is that, this is again, it's a reminder about it being a process. And, it's certainly an issue that's out there with access to capital, which I think everyone has acknowledged. And that was, essentially the heart is that, you sort of identify something that you think can work. And in this market, things are happening very fast. And because you don't have necessarily a quick trigger with respect to being able to lock up something, you might miss an opportunity that will be ripe, particularly when it comes to the control aspect. When you talked about a project, if you don't have control over the land, then something could go out the door very quickly. So
yeah, I do tell you, I stopped a little bit short. I do think there's adequate capital right now to make developments work for persons of color as well. What folks do lack, though, is generational wealth. Now, mom and dad on my side of things never wrote a guarantee, right? But I don't have money. What I did, my pathway to doing my own real estate development was finding partners who were able to provide those guarantees. So I think there's money out there. I think there's an educational component. If you're looking for really well-heeled groups to support, you have an idea, you want to make this happen, there'd be a lot of education that would be necessary to get someone to stand behind the guarantee. You understand the concept of a guarantee, right? Everything's great when it's great, but if stuff falls south, who's going to step in and write checks to make everybody whole?
Right.
And so, on market rate deals, I've got, guys who own businesses. One owns a contracting business. The other was a CFO for an agribusiness. So, those are the money guys. It's harder if you don't have those relationships. And I built my brand by just having good skills, good number skills. So, and I know that's my bias. Like, again, you heard me talk about building the numbers. I do think if you really want to if this is something that really interests you, that's an area I'd really focus on. How do I like dream of pro formas? You ever see the movie Jiro Dreams of Sushi? This guy, he like makes the best sushi in the world in a Tokyo subway. But that's like that. I dream of pro formas. So that there is no shortage of deals. I remember a developer colleague telling me that everyone feels like, I think particularly newer people to the industry think they've got something that nobody's figured out before. The challenge, and just there's nothing fresh, there's nothing new. And I say that with a little bit of extremism because there are new, fresh ideas. But by and large, the real challenge is being able to tell that story where you can attract capital to make something happen.
Can I just jump in here really quick? I just want to clarify something. So it's not that Black and brown people have not necessarily had capital or don't have capital. It's the issue of not having access to capital. Historically and traditionally, Black and brown people, when fitting a very similar profile to non-people of color, still have not had equitable and equal access to capital as non-people of color. So I just want to make that statement that the capital is out there, but the important thing is ensuring that Black and brown people have access to that capital in the same way that their non-people of color counterparts have had access to that capital. So just wanted to clarify that. And I think that, with everything that's been happening over the past year and a half, there are a lot of institutions that still need to be challenged a little bit, but there are some that are trying to educate themselves and trying to make sure that they make that capital access accessible to Black and brown people. So just wanted to clarify that point.
There are a couple of questions in the chat. The first one is from Colette, who said, when you first got started, how did you raise capital?
Yeah, well, so I was a project manager when I got started. So I worked for other people who had capital, and I went from there to working for the Housing Finance Agency in Wisconsin, WIDA. So I ran the low-income housing tax credit program for a few cycles. And then I worked for a developer, so a low-income housing developer. And the beauty of that program is raising capital is really programmatic. So you come up with a development, all the capital comes from institutional sources. So it wasn't me going out knocking on doors or calling on friends and family to support what I'd done. When I really became a real estate developer and did my own developments. And so I was the developer for the two developments I alluded to. It was through friends. So I was introduced to the general contractor, who was the major investor for the first development. One of our secondary major investors kind of liked working together. So we did, our follow-up development to that afterwards. But a lot of it was just luck. But again, I think because I was so focused on the numbers, my numbers were crisp and clear. The financial partners that we talked to, felt they understood what we were talking about. I also was the interface with a lot of our legal work just because of the experience I'd had working for the agency. So I put together our offering memoranda. It was just, again, it was really presenting that work.
Hi, Christopher. It's Adrian. Thank you for the presentation. It was very informative, and I received a lot of information about it. My question is, you said that, you were able to receive capital from your partners or from your friends who agreed to become partners with you. Did you have to partition the shares when it came to getting the money back?
Yeah.
Meaning
So
it's, if you, as you are the contractor, you've invested what, 65%, this is hypothetically speaking, but you've invested 65% into the.
oops, we kind of lost you. So let me answer your question with specifics, because I came from the tax credit world, which is functions a totally different way. So I learned a lot of this on the go. What we essentially did was the initial ownership entity bought shares effectively in the company at $1 a share. So I invested sweat equity. And when we had to raise money, we sold those shares for $1,000 a share. So I bought 50 shares for $1. So I paid $50. New investors came in, bought 50 shares at $1,000. So they put $50,000 in. So each tranche of $50,000 shares is worth the same today, but on the front end, I paid much less for mine. And I can justify that because I put sweat equity in, right? I put the deal together. So in those two developments, even though I'm managing member of both of those, I own 5.8% for one, 4.5% for the others. I make the decisions. I have controlling interest with two other partners in each of those developments. But in some cases, my investment was $50 or $100, and the other folks coming in invested $300,000, $400,000, $500,000 each.
Understood. Thank you very much for clarifying.
Yeah. No, but that's, if you have intellectual investment where you're putting together a deal, that would be a way. We could talk more offline, like reach out to me. That would be a good way to do it. So, but then I didn't offer, even though I offered sort of some guarantees, unconditional guarantees, my guarantees aren't worth anything because I don't have the assets that they have. So the banks were fundamentally looking on my capital partners, for that.
Understood. Thank you.
Yep.
Chris, there is the last question in the chat is a request for access to the pro forma that you presented in your slideshow. And then I'm seeing Akeem also just added, how can everybody reach out to you?
Deanna can provide my contact information. I can share the pro forma with you or one like it. It's more for observational use. It's not going to be very useful. It's designed really for tax credit development. It was done representatively, but I'll share an example of that with Deanna, and she can share that with you.
Chris, I think what may be more fitting is to share the pro forma that we send out to our Jumpstart Wilmington participants.
And you've got that already, right?
Yeah, so I have that.
Okay.
So I can send that along with the recording of our pro forma training workshop.
Okay.
So I'll make sure that gets circulated in a follow-up email that we typically send out after the Kickstart session, along with Chris's contact information and a copy of the slideshow presentation. Are there any final questions? I know that we have 5 minutes left and want to give you an opportunity to ask any questions.
Hi, this is Fritz Pettit. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Hi, Chris. Great presentation. Again, a lot of knowledge. My question is, like you said, there are a lot of deals that are out there that are very similar. Everyone is trying to solve a problem. A lot of times that solution is the same as someone else's. When you were first starting out, and even what you do today, what do you typically do for your pro forma or your presentation to your investors that helps to differentiate your offer from their offer? Because you hear, and it's always drilled into your head, everyone's trying to build a better mousetrap, but why is your mousetrap better than the person that's standing next to you? So I guess my question is how do you differentiate yourself?
Yeah, it's a good question. So Roger, the guy who, the first slide that I showed you, was very Socratic in his mentoring of me. So when I learned real estate development, we would drive around and look at a lot of stuff. And he would say, what do you notice about the dumpster enclosures? You know, and we'd sort of reflect and kick that around. So I just got back from Portland, Oregon. I did a vacation there, and as part of my vacation, I drive around and look at solutions they have to problems. So good design is important to me. So I think it's always nice to have, you know, a variety of solutions sort of packed into one. If you're able to accomplish more with what you're doing than other people, that makes for a compelling story. So we did a development. Wisconsin's got that thumb that sticks out into Lake Michigan that's called Door County. I did a development there. The challenge is it is a tourist destination. They wanted to kickstart. They have no quality multifamily housing there. They really wanted to activate some of the downtown businesses that they have to make them more year round. So we got a commercial tenant on the first floor who expanded his space from further up the street. I think tripled his space. His sales have like quadrupled. I mean, he's just done crazy. He does paddleboard surfing. I mean, so he's got this active, vibrant center. I think if there's one, it's a long answer, but I think it's just synergies. How do you really create something special? You know, again, the Portland thing, I love brew pubs, not because I love beer, but because I love people coming together. And, you know, do you have a sense of brand identity? Do people feel really comfortable in your spaces? I think more than anything else, you know, I try to work with good design professionals. Our developments, stuff that I've done in the past really represents that. So I keep that in mind.
Thank you.
Well, thank you, Fritz. We will go ahead and wrap it up. Chris, thank you so much for this is your first presentation at our Kickstart session, but I know you have presented to our Jumpstart Wilmington cohorts before. So we thank you as always for your time, for your commitment, and for your dedication to this program. We thank you all for coming out this evening. I see a lot of all you faithfuls here who are consistently showing up to all of our monthly Kickstart sessions. So we just greatly appreciate you all for taking the time out, and we hope that you've learned a lot. As previously mentioned, we will be sending out a follow-up email. That email will contain Chris's contact information, a copy of his PowerPoint slides. We'll also include some pro forma information. And most importantly, we do include an evaluation, a short survey link. We really would appreciate all of your feedback. At the very least, just share some recommendations on some topics that Kickstart session topics that you'd like to see in the future. We really would like to hear from you instead of foreseeing what maybe you want to learn about. So that's your opportunity to say, hey, Cinnaire, we'd love to hear a Kickstart session around this particular topic. So if you don't submit your evaluation for anything else, just submit some recommended topics that you'd like to hear about in the future. With that being said, thank you again. Thank you to our Jumpstart Wilmington staff for being on the line this evening as well. And have a wonderful evening, and we will see you next month. We're still planning for our next Kickstart session, so we may have one in September, or the next one may be in October. So stay tuned for an upcoming invite to our next Kickstart session. Take care. Have a good night.